All right. So with rental arbitrage, I'm going to go through a similar detailed walkthrough for you guys. So we want to start with, I think conceptually for a lot of investors, and I'm just going to touch on this topic first. A lot of investors have a hard time going after this opportunity. As investors, you're always taught you want to buy real estate, you want to own real estate, you want to have control of real estate. So from my perspective as an entrepreneur and as a business person, yes, you do want to own real estate. You do want to be able to generate and grow your generational wealth and be able to pass that down to your grandchildren. But equally important is what's going on month to month is directly impacted. You've got to have consistent monthly revenue coming in. So with the rental arbitrage model, the way I view this is you're investing in a monthly net cash flow. You're controlling the property. You don't own the property, but you're controlling the property, and you're basically creating an asset and a business that will generate consistent monthly revenue over time. You can set your goals based on how many properties, how much monthly revenue you'd like to generate. So is this kind of the end all, one all? I don't think so, but I think that's why it's good to have some diversification. It's good to be able to spend some time and effort and basically build out this particular part of your business to give you the comfort that you've got a monthly income coming in that frees you up to focus on other things like buying some of these other strategic types of properties, looking at vacation properties and so on. Take care of your monthly revenue goals and expenses first. It frees you up to do that. Like I mentioned, some investors have a hard time wrapping their head around that. But once you understand the value and basically creating that, there's very few businesses that I know of that you can generate 10 to 20,000 to 30 to 40,000 a month in revenue without hiring a lot of people, having a lot of headaches, buying into a franchise. You're able to do this without actually hiring people and having the hiring and firing and the whole headaches of HR and dealing with that, building a large company or a mid-sized company. You're able to build a process. You're able to outsource a lot of the day-to-day operation and delegate a lot of the work to outside contractors, relieve yourself of that headache, but you're still able to generate that monthly and control and take advantage of that monthly income. So with that being said, let's dive into some of the funding options, right? With rental arbitrage, you are going to have, like I mentioned before, you're going to need deposit money, right? You're going to need first and sometimes the last month's rent. You're going to need staging money. And then you're also going to want to have a reserve for some of those months where you might need to make sure that your monthly expenses are covered. All that being said, on a one bedroom, to be comfortable, you're going to need to be, all in for all of those things that I've just mentioned in the 10 to 12,000 range. Obviously, as you get bigger properties, you're going to need to be a little bit more and so on. You get the idea here. So your net monthly income potential based on how much money you need to get started is going to vary, obviously, for the size of the property, right? So a good rule of thumb on a one bedroom is in that $800 plus range. On a two bedroom, you're 1,200 plus, 1,400. Three bedroom, you're going to be 1,600 plus. Four bedrooms, you can very easily be in the 2,000 to 3,000 range, and so on. Five bedrooms or more. And so you can see just based on this high level math, your break even point is usually going to be about 8 to 10 months as a general rule. So it's going to take 8 to 10 months to recoup your initial investment of your startup expenses, your first month's rent, your deposit, your staging costs, and your reserve. Now, so in your planning stages, basically you've got that out of pocket expense in the beginning. By month 8, you've recouped that expense, and now you are looking at that monthly net number as pure profit after your expenses, right? So essentially, you're now after 8 months. Sometimes it takes sooner, but I usually like to be conservative with these estimates. So call it 8 to 10 months. So the reason why we want to go after longer term leases is it does us no good to do a 12-month lease here if most of the lease we're going to be recouping our investment and we've only got a few months left at the end. And so you usually your term that you want to negotiate on these are usually going to be 24 and roughly 36 months for that reason, right? So you lock in your fixed rental amount for 24 months, knowing that your net profit number is basically going to come out after that month, that 8th month. So you want to have enough time to be able to recoup. Now, obviously, your initial term of 24 to 36 is still has a renewable option like other leases do. But what it does is it locks you into that fixed monthly expense for that 24 to 36-month period. A lot of landlords like that stability. So that's another carrot that you can wave when you're talking to landlords about rental arbitrage, right? So let's talk a little bit about the funding options. Obviously, if you have liquid cash and you see the value in investing in this business to get that monthly cash flow set up once you've got everything put in place, most of us don't have 30, 50, 60,000 just laying around. There are different options to look at. If you already have credit cards, you can access your credit cards knowing and have the discipline that 8 to 10 months, you're going to pay those down, right? I'm not encouraging people to just build up a bunch of credit card debt. Your intent is to basically use that as a revolver so you can add more units as you go, right? There are business lines of credit, and we actually have used in our business companies that specialize in, at any given time, a lot of the different banks have promotions going on business lines of credit that they basically negotiate the different rates for you. It's not tied to your personal credit, so it doesn't impact your personal FICO score. And it's a good way to look at different promotions like 6 months interest free, 0% interest, things of that nature that allow you to step into having access to, in a lot of cases, 50 to 100,000 in business lines of credit to be able to get this started. Usually a minimum of 640 to 680. But if you've got that minimum FICO score, there's definitely a lot of options we can look at with you to get those business lines of credit set up. It usually takes a couple of weeks to do it, but we've done that to grow our business when we first started with the rental arbitrage model. And it's a good way, have the discipline to pay those down as you go. So as you add units and as you are getting your monthly revenue, make sure those business lines of credit get paid down so you continue to reuse them and you just use them as revolvers. And so those are two good funding options to basically get started to generate your monthly revenue with rental arbitrage. So let's move on and let's talk about some of the market advantages. Right? We can touch on some of the advantages with when you're trying to look at different opportunities, the same kind of concept here. So there are problem properties. Landlords might be having a hard time leasing out because they've got crime in the area. We've looked at properties that have had problems getting long-term tenants and have these huge vacancy numbers because every other weekend there's some shooting or something that's nearby and they're not maintaining the pool. There's different things with the property and like an apartment complex that they're having problems putting in long-term tenants. And so those types of problem properties, as long as you go in without inheriting some of those issues, they become potential good opportunities to do this. The other thing is landlords that have high rent as an asking price, and those are sitting on the market, they're not getting rented. Those are good opportunities to go after. Nobody else is talking to them. And so they're open to having that conversation. You always, with rental arbitrage, want to never pay more than what the market rate is, right? And so part of your market analysis you don't want to overpay. So even though you're doing these leases and even though you're doing this as a business and you're conceptually going to be generating revenue higher than what the monthly lease is, you never want to pay more than that, right? So you still want to try to negotiate those down, but those are landlords that are going to be more eager to talk to you about a possible option because they've been on the market for quite some time. The other market advantage, no tenants are coming to them with a longer term corporate lease, right? The landlords like stability. So like I talked about before, you want to do 24 to 36 months, and they're not hearing that from other tenants or other people that are looking at their properties. Most people are looking at a 6-month or a 12-month lease, and gives you an edge over being able to have that conversation. The other thing, all the lower level maintenance, you want to have control over. They're not dealing with it, right? But it puts you in the driver's seat, allows you to control getting the toilet unclogged, having your handyman go there on the weekends to address any issues that come up for any guest stays and things of that nature. The other thing is, which is a selling point, property is in much better shape than with a long-term tenant. So if you think about someone that's been in a property for 2 years as a long-term tenant, let's say it's a 4-bedroom house, when they move out after 2 years, you're going to have to replace carpet, flooring, new paint, possibly new appliances. And as a landlord and as an owner of a property, that becomes a continuous cycle. And so with the short-term rental model, that same property over 2 years, even though we might have had hundreds of people coming and going, every time somebody leaves that property and we have our cleaners go in there, our cleaners are professionally inspecting that property in addition to doing the cleaning. They're bringing to our attention any issues that need correcting. If there's a scuff on the wall, if a doorknob falls off, any defect whatsoever, we have our maintenance team on call to go correct those items. And so you can blink your eyes over 2 years and step away from that property, and it will be in much, much better shape than if it was a long-term tenant in there. That makes sense. So that is that from the owner of the property's perspective, that is definitely a huge benefit, a huge advantage. And the other thing is this is a corporate lease. We're going to set up the lease payments to be sent via ACH each month. And basically, in this recession environment, a lot of landlords are having to evict people. They're not paying them on time. Ability to step into a relationship with a company like yours that is professional, that's running this like a business, they basically see a huge advantage in working with you. And as I've mentioned before, what this creates, all of these things, it doesn't take that long when you work with that first landlord, property owner, for them to recognize all these value, right? And so what they're going to do is you'll be first on their list when they have other properties that have regular tenants that expire their leases. They're going to come to you first and give you the opportunity to engage. And that's why it's important to have your financing in line, because if you've got a $100,000 business line of credit and you've got an opportunity to take on 3 more units or 3 more properties from a current investor landlord relationship, you want to be able to financially do that, right? That's why it's important to get that set up in the beginning, but take advantage of some of those growth opportunities, if that makes sense. So again, put any questions out there that you guys might have. Hopefully there's no questions because I'm covering this clearly and concisely, but I doubt that. So feel free to throw any questions out there that come up. We are going to take a break here in a little bit for about 10 minutes, as we're going to be going for another hour and a half. We're almost at the halfway point. So we're going to take a quick 10-minute break here in a little bit as we finish up on the rental arbitrage. And then when we come back from break, we're going to finish off with the management deep dive, and then we're going to get into the exciting stuff with the market analysis. Stick with me, everybody, as we dig through this here. So the next part of the rental arbitrage model that we want to talk about is the property types. All right, property types, as we've looked at, obviously, there's all types of single family homes that are out there and available for rent. There's all types of multifamily. Now, single family, like we've talked about, the 2 bedrooms is an interesting option, also with rentals. But we've also found that the 4 and 5 bedroom houses do very well with occupancy and demand. And so those are usually, if you're going into the single family, those are usually good targets to start off with. Yes, it's more startup money in the beginning, but as I've pointed out earlier, they are more profitable. It does take that same 8 to 10 months to recoup your investment. If you're going after single family, I would recommend going after the 4 to 5 bedroom properties instead of the 2 to 3, just as a general rule. Multifamily, obviously, most of the multifamily are going to be your 1 to 3 bedrooms, studios as well. We have seen a shift across the United States with pricing being a lot more competitive with studios and 1 bedrooms, simply because there's a large number. There's a reason why people start with studios and 1 bedrooms. There's less properties to set up, it's less cost. And so there's a larger number of those properties in the market. So what does that do? There's a larger supply. And so it impacts your ability to be profitable. So be very cautious when you're doing your market analysis. It doesn't impact all areas, but there are some areas that have been negatively impacted by competition of people going back to hotels strategically that have caused lower revenue numbers in studios and 1 bedrooms. So be very cautious of that. Now, obviously, when I first started, I started out with 12 1 bedroom units. I just looked at a heat map on AirDNA of where all the activity was, where all of the popular spots were for people to come to the city to enjoy, walkable to the parks and to the restaurants and to the bars. If you're doing rental arbitrage, this gives you the ability to basically figure out your target area based on where people are already being successful. That's one way to do it. You can do this in any market, in any neighborhood, in any suburban area. It doesn't have to be in the hot areas. That is a good place to start, usually, to see what the current activity is, to be able to get started with it. So multifamily, the other thing I'll say about multifamily is you've got your large multi-unit developments that tend to be a little bit more problematic when it comes to doing the short-term rental model. A lot of them have key fob access or garage access, amenities that are potentially hard to commingle short-term guest stays with long-term. So the larger developments are usually a little bit more problematic to engage with. Not impossible, they still do well. I tend to gravitate to smaller and mid-size multifamilies. There's 10, I would say 10 to 20 units, no more than 30 units. One, you have a better chance of dealing with the direct owner of a building if it's a mid-size, smaller multi-unit building. If it's a 300 plus or 200 plus or 100 plus larger development, you're typically dealing with a corporation or a large property manager. And you don't have that same relationship opportunity and building the ability to have long-term growth with that relationship. So typically smaller, mid-size multifamily unit buildings, you're going to deal directly with the owner or the property manager that has direct access to the owner. And that gives you a lot more control. And this particular concept is easier to get across the goal line when it's that size of a property. A lot of the short-term rental master leases that we've done have been quadplexes, 8-unit buildings, 10-unit buildings, 27 units, 22 units, and so on. When you're doing your prospecting, you're out there looking at different places for rent. That's where I would recommend you spend your time on if you're looking at multifamily opportunities. You can also look at vacation opportunities, right? So beach properties, lake, mountain, right? So you can go look, don't necessarily have to be on the beach or on the lake or the perfect mountain view, but if you are looking at properties that are for rent in those areas, you could be 2 or 3 blocks from the beach. You could be 20 minutes from the beach. You could be 10 minutes from the lake and so on. We've had, at its peak, we had 20 properties, all 3, 4, 5 bedroom houses in Tampa, Florida. as an example. Most of them were rental arbitrage. Some of them were managed properties from an investor that we partnered with. A lot of these properties are just regular neighborhoods in the Tampa market, 25-minute, 35-minute drives to Clearwater Beach, St. Pete Beach. And so people would come and spend the $300 to $400 a night to stay in a regular house, and they were fine driving 20, 30 minutes to the beach. So you don't necessarily have to be in the $2 million house and stumble into the backyard, into the beach to be successful with short-term rentals. You can just have access and look at markets that give access to that. There's Tybee Island, for example, Myrtle Beach, Panama City. There's a plethora of different kind of beach towns that present this as an opportunity. Jacksonville, Pensacola. So again, you don't have to physically you can look at a regular rental property and generate revenue because you've got folks that are fine with driving that 20, 30 minutes to the beach. They don't have to be on the beach. So that certainly is an option for you. Now, I mentioned this before with the acquisition strategy, but you could also do the house hack with this too, right? So we have some investors that hop from place to place. And we have one of our students, she actually rents a 5-bedroom townhouse and she rents 4 rooms out while she lives in one of them. And so she's generating enough revenue on that one house to pay her bills, and then also nets about $2,000 a month in revenue on top of that. The house hack option is certainly one way to go as well with rental arbitrage. Just pointing that out. All right, so those are your property types. Again, multifamily, go after the smaller ones. Single family, try to look at some of the larger properties as an option. And those are my recommendations on property type. So let's start digging into with the process, right? With rental arbitrage, what's involved with the process. So continue to put any questions you might have in the meantime, and then we'll jump on that here shortly. So your process for the rental arbitrage model. One of the very first things you want to do, we've already touched on this. Obviously, you want to have your capital and your funding set up, right? Whatever your strategy is there. You want to be able to set up a legal entity. You may already have a legal entity that you can use, but none of these master leases are going to be in your personal name. They all need to be in a company name. You can use one legal entity for multiple master leases, but you want to get that set up before you go start looking at properties. There's companies that charge thousands of dollars, which I think is ludicrous, to help set up a legal entity. This is something that you can do for free in most states. We show you how to do that if you don't already have one set up. You also want to tie a bank account to it, and you want to apply for your federal reference number for IRS. And so that all can take a day or two. That's a very quick process, and we recommend doing that before you get started. The other thing you're going to need are references, right? Quite simply, even if you've never done master leasing before, you personally have rented property, possibly. You've got some rental history, and you've got some creditors that you have history with. You can use, our clients use Diamond Edge Properties as a reference. So make sure you think about these folks you're engaging with are doing a corporate lease with you. And so they're less concerned about your income and about your personal FICO score. But you still have to define some sort of credibility behind what you're doing and what your experience level is. So think about that as far as who you want to put down as references. When you're first starting out, you can actually get away with getting started without this ever coming up. I think the first 2 or 3 that I did from scratch when I first got started, the question didn't even come up. But you want to have a plan for that as far as communicating what your track record is. Obviously, you're starting out with this. You don't have leases going up and running already. You obviously want to be crystal clear when you meet with these landlords, what you're doing, what your objective is. There's nothing wrong with saying that you're starting in this market and you are looking to grow and expand. You're running this like a business. And the other thing that we've done with a lot of our students is they can use my company as part of the track record, right? Most of you, I think, are in Charlotte. Diamond Edge Properties has managed hundreds of properties in Georgia and in Florida, and we're now expanding into the North Carolina market. And so that's one way you can position it. If you end up being a part of the program, that's one of the benefits, that you can latch yourself to our experience and our history. When you have those first few uncomfortable conversations with the landlord, when those questions come up about your experience and your track record in doing this particular line of work and this particular model. One of the things that we provide in detail is a recommended lease addendum that you're going to require to be added to the lease agreement when you do these. And we give you a very detailed outline of what to ask for. Just like in the acquisitions process, we want to make sure that even before you start negotiating these deals or start looking at them, you have a comfort that the market analysis is done correctly. And we're going to get to that part. But equally important is negotiating your terms, right? So on your lease addendum, we typically, as an example, make the argument that we usually pay a very low deposit, right? So the default for most landlords is they want the first month's rent amount or the monthly rent amount as the deposit. So we typically want to say, we're investing in staging and setting up the property. We're going to be putting electronic locks. We're putting outdoor camera surveillance. We're investing in improving this property. And like we've covered before, this property is going to be in much better shape than if you had a long-term tenant in it. So in some cases, we've been able to negotiate $0 as a deposit. But if you have to, we usually do a very nominal token amount of $300 or $400 as a deposit. The other thing you want to negotiate, which is critical, absolutely critical, right? I'm doing a 24-month lease. I want to shoot for, best case scenario, getting that first month free. Now, why is that important? Usually, once you get started after the first 2 or 3 months, if they come to you with 5 units that you need to make a decision on within a few weeks, or they're going to be putting long-term tenants in it, you're going to lose that opportunity. If you've got 5 units that you can stage and set up, you need to have a buffer of 30 days to get set up. It usually takes 2 to 3 weeks normally to set up a unit, even if it's just a 1-bedroom by itself. And so how can you do this at scale if you get the opportunity to get 5 of these all in one fell swoop? The only way to really take care of that opportunity at scale is to have some relief in that financial obligation, right? So if your monthly rent is $1,800, right, 5 units, and they want you to sign the lease next month, right? Before you even talk about your staging costs, that's $9,000, right? So where are you going to get the revenue from to pay $9,000 for the first month's rent due on the first of the month? So even though you're starting out usually with 1 unit, what tends to happen, you guys know this just generally in business, when you negotiate something with somebody for the first time, the tendency is, if you do more of those same transactions, you want to keep the terms the same. You want to simplify things. You don't want to have to renegotiate. So spend the time in the beginning to get it right, such that it gives you the ability to take advantage of opportunities that come up in the future. Because essentially, if you don't have $9,000 available in your cash flow extra, you may have to turn down those 5 units. Had you negotiated in your lease terms, oh yeah, I can take on 5 more units. Let's just use the same terms that we have with our current lease. Sure. It's easy, right? Cut and paste. So now, because I have that first month free on 5 units, I can hit the ground running. I'm not coming out of pocket $9,000 to get started. I might have hopefully a $0 or a $400 deposit on each of the 5 units. I've got my line of credit to go stage those properties. And by that second and third week, and hopefully a little bit in advance of that, you are up and running and you've got your first booking. Let's say October 1st is when the lease starts. You've got the first month free, so your first lease payment's not due till November 1st. Hopefully you get a little bit of advance access to the property before October 1st, maybe a week in advance, right? Technically, my goal is to, by October 20th, I want to be live, listing pictures taken, got my first guest checking in, And November 1st rolls around and I've got $1,800 for each of those units because I've got a guest that stayed there for at least 5 to 6 days or two different guests to generate that revenue. So now I'm off to the races in sync instead of me being in the hole besides my staging and setup costs. So I hope that makes sense in a long-winded way. Basically, it's better to have that negotiation done in the beginning because you're going to be able to have the ability to be scalable and add more units quickly and be a little bit more financially comfortable to do. If you take nothing away from this section for rental arbitrage, that alone is going to save you and present a lot more opportunities to you than had you not pursued it in that manner. So that's a critical nugget. Make sure you absorb that and make use of that going forward to help you be successful in growing the business. The other thing that is of utmost importance is you want to have a clear understanding of your monthly expenses, right? So just like on the acquisitions, we talked about the importance of your rehab budget, the importance of your ARV. In rental arbitrage, the same things hold true for having a good handle. You don't want to just back of the napkin on this. So what is your electricity cost? What is your internet cost? Don't take a guess. What is the actual number? How much is the water bill? Is the landlord including that in the lease? Is that a separate payment? All of your monthly expenses, pest control, is the landlord doing pest control? Are you doing pest control? If it's a single family house, who's doing the landscaping? What is the garbage pickup expense? So if you're on a 4-bedroom house, let's say your rent is $2,200, right? So it's a 4-bedroom house. You're going to have pest control, usually call it $85 a month. You're going to have landscaping, let's call it $150 a month. And then of course your electricity, $250, water, whatever that's going to be. You might have gas, and you definitely will have internet, right? So we recommend internet only. You don't want to do cable. Most robust internet services are going to be $90 to $100 depending on the area. And so you definitely want to factor that in there. You're also going to have supplies every month, right? We provide toilet paper, towels, soaps, all of the disposable items, water, bottles of water. So you've got a monthly expense with that. You will have a monthly laundry expense as well that you try to pass that on to the guests. So just in this one example, and it takes some time obviously to do this, but you want to take the time. So in this one example, I've got $85 for pest control, $150 for landscaping, $250 for electricity, $65 for water, $55 for gas, $100 for internet, $150 in supplies, $100 in laundry. So I'm at $955, right? And so if your rent is $2,200 and your total expenses is $955, so your total all-in monthly cost is going to be $3,155, right? So you want to be very comfortable hanging your hat and having a good, clear, crystal clear understanding of this number here. As you look at your market analysis and you start to look at your profit potential, this number should be very close to being accurate. If it's not, if you're $200, $300 off, you could be making a bad decision on that opportunity. Just as equally as important on acquisitions, this is the critical important part on rental arbitrage, is you want to have a clear understanding of the expenses. Finally, on rental arbitrage, and then we're going to handle some questions and then take a quick break. So cash flow, income, potential. You're looking at on smaller properties, 800, and higher properties, larger properties, 3,500 plus, sometimes in the 4 to 5,000 range as well, depending on how large the properties are and how higher in they are. So that gives you the deep dive on Rental arbitrage. Let's take a look at some of the questions that we have. One of the things that we do in our program is I have a master lease calculator that helps you tabulate on each opportunity you look at, and it gives you some measurements by reviewing the opportunity to know what's a good deal versus a bad deal. So we give you a master lease calculator that basically helps with this analysis here so that you can make good decisions on some of the prospects that you're looking at. Okay, so let's take a quick look at the questions here. Do you have a lease template for us to work from? Yes, I do provide a lease addendum. So what I recommend is, and this has worked pretty well for us, right? When you have a landlord that's renting a property, they usually have their own standard agreement. Sometimes it's through a realtor, sometimes it's a standard template. So you don't want to try to force something on them that's different. So the way to do that is you keep their current agreement in place and you basically ask them to attach your addendum or special stipulations to that lease. And we provide you with that in the program as well. And so that will give you your protection. There's a lot of things that are covered in there. We've talked about some of them here. Some of the other things are you want to make sure you have a 30-day notice out if there's any changes in the short-term rental regulations in that local market. So you don't get locked into a 3-year lease if all of a sudden you're not able to do short-term rentals anywhere in that area because of the city or the county making a change. So that gives the landlord the ability to agree to allow you out of that lease if that were to happen, as an example. So there's things like that are in there to protect you as a part of doing that master lease. Another question is, where's the best to advertise House Hack or any of these? So you might need to elaborate a little bit on what you're meaning by that. Where's best to advertise House Hack or any of these? So I guess what you're asking is, where's the best place to look for House Hack opportunities? Just add a little bit more details there if you can for me on that one, and then I'll come back to it. So let's see, another question, and probably the cost of staging as well. So that is included in my master lease calculator, is the cost of staging as well. As a part of your calculation, it shows you how many months it takes to recoup your investment, and it gives you a quick way to do your analysis on each opportunity. Why no cable for TV? Most people that are traveling and using Airbnb and going in and out of these short-term rentals, they are typically fine with smart TVs and basically streaming services, right? As long as you have internet at that property and you've got your smart TVs that you've purchased and set up through your staging, what that does is it negates having $150 to $200 as an additional expense to pay for cable. Nowadays, the streaming services and apps, you can pretty much duplicate any channel that's out there by getting an app loaded on a smart TV and watching it that way. Most of the people that are traveling are comfortable with logging into Netflix, logging into Prime Video, logging into their streaming service, and they have their shows saved and their favorites saved. And so that's usually the way folks like to be able to do it. So in the math that we just went through, there's $900 in expenses. If you put cable in there, it could be another $150 to put you over $1,000. So it solves for having an additional expense. Plus, there's no need for it if you have guests that are able to use streaming services. So that's how we handle that portion. So we have another question. Do you need additional insurance policy if guest damages property? So that's a great question. The Airbnb Resolution Center, you're going to handle most of your guest damages by getting reimbursed from their guarantee. So Airbnb basically has an insurance policy that they provide to you as a host that covers you in the event that the guest damages any of the properties during their stay. There are other insurance options that you can get that are out there, but 90% of the time, you're going to be able to make use of the Airbnb coverage. We've done that for most of our claims, pretty much all of our claims. So that's usually the recommended way to cut down on your expense so you're not paying for additional insurance. You can get a short-term rental policy that covers for liability and some other things. That's recommended. But as far as the guest damages go, that usually is going to be handled for the most part by Airbnbs. resolution center, which is another great reason to use Airbnb.